Hey everyone, welcome back to the Crowded Booth. Bryce Koon here, and it's a fantastic Halloween Monday for a lot of Auburn fans. Bryan Harsin has been let go, and we bring in a Auburn guy to talk more about that on today's episode of the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
Well, we welcome you in on a Monday afternoon, a busy Monday. Thanks, Auburn, for dropping this news on Halloween Day. I got my man Zach McKinnell here. Zach, you just got done telling me you guys did a live show with On 3 Auburn the other day, or last night, I should say. Did you expect this news to drop? I know there had been a lot of conversation with the new AD. Kind of tell me your instant reaction from the guys over at Auburn Live on 3.
I mean, there was everyone's known for 2-3 weeks that this was coming eventually. No one knew exactly when, but we had the Cohen thing drop during the game on Saturday. I think Pete Thamel was the first one to break it, and then it came out that it wasn't really necessarily finalized, that there was some pushback behind the scenes, according to Justin Hokason over at On 3, but apparently that's finalized today, and then within 30-45 minutes the news breaks that Harsin's fired. The most surprising thing is Justin Hokason, Jeffrey Lee, all of them thought there was going to be a evaluation period, about maybe a week, 2 weeks potentially, especially bringing an outside guy in. If they hire internally, maybe that internal review process isn't as long. But I mean, they came back to back, and I think that was the most surprising part. But I think looking at the way Auburn's program is trending, I mean, I know some people don't love mid-season firings, but I didn't see the point of dragging this on any longer with the early signing period continuously being more important for Auburn, players entering the transfer portal left and right. It was a move that I think was needed, and I think they probably even waited a little bit too long. I think the AD search really postponed the inevitable.
Yeah, it did. It's kind of interesting. I covered Georgia Tech for 24/7 Sports, and Tech fired their AD and the head coach on the same day. Auburn, a little bit of variation. They hire the AD and then fire the head coach. Want to get a glimpse here because you could almost ask what went right for Bryan Harsin instead of what went wrong. In your opinion, we've talked about it. What went wrong? And then I had a comma. Is Bryan Harsin the worst head coach in Auburn football history? Like, do we need to have that conversation and get to it? Let me know.
I don't know. I guess I got to go back and do, because there might have been one, way back in the day that could have been worse. But I would say in recent memory, probably, because I mean, that 2012 season's that might be the worst season in Auburn history. That was a terrible season. But also, when you look at Chizik's resume, he also has a national championship, so it kind of evens it out. I just think this wasn't a fit from the beginning, Bryce. Really and truly, it was that there were two sides when he was hired. One side said, man, I don't see the fit. He's a West Coast guy. He doesn't have a lot of ties down south. Is he going to be able to surround himself with guys who can recruit the South, guys with relationships in high schools? Is he going to fit the culture of what the SEC is, what Auburn is? Then there was the other side that was like, well, the last time this happened, it was Urban Meyer going to Florida. He was a West Coast guy from Utah. He came down and it worked fairly well, I would say, for Florida in the long run for that one. But it was just hire after hire that didn't work out. He fires the wide receiver coach four games into his tenure. The OCDC doesn't work. We have a switch again. We lose Bo Nix, and hindsight's 2020, but that looks like a terrible decision based on what that kid's doing out in Eugene, Oregon right now, and potentially could be in New York for the Heisman the way he's playing. It was just, I feel like the staff, I feel like Harsin, they never found their footing, and it seemed like every time they gained a little bit of momentum, it was ripped away. When you look back through his tenure, what happens if that overtime game against Bama goes the other way? What happens if he doesn't collapse down the stretch and blow double-digit leads to Mississippi State, South Carolina? And it's just that there were so many what ifs. What if they pull out that LSU game this year? And there's just a lot of what ifs in his tenure. But I wouldn't say he's the worst coach in Auburn history, just because I might be missing someone. But it's one that's not going to be looked upon very fondly by Auburn fans moving forward.
This is a volatile fan base. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. You obviously have a lot of experience with Auburn as well, so we are well ingrained in the Auburn fan base. Look, there's a lot of names already being thrown around that I don't think have the sex appeal of where Auburn boosters want to go. I don't think Matt Rule is one of those guys. I mean, he might be a solid head coaching candidate. I don't think the fan base is going to be excited about it. Obviously, Lane Kiffin's there. Brandon Marcello over at CBS Sports HQ just went live and said that's kind of their zeroing in. Give me your thoughts. Who does Auburn go after? Maybe one or two, maybe three names. And I think Kiffin has to be on that short list.
Yeah, he's definitely on the short list. I think he's probably the favorite. The question mark becomes, I believe there was someone that put out a tweet that, I mean, Auburn's paying upwards of like $50 million in buyouts right now when going, and that's not even including what they're probably going to have to pay for the staff.
Yeah.
That is ultimately going to be out the door from this coaching staff. You're still paying Gus's assistants. You're still paying Gus. You got buyouts all over the place in terms of athletically for Auburn. My opinion is, I don't really see a lot of names out there that look like home run hires to me. All the candidates I've heard, they have their positives, and I'll talk about them in a second. But then they also have some major drawbacks that I think come with them. Like when you look at Lane Kiffin, obviously, he's been successful at Ole Miss. But my question is, why, would you want to leave the comfort of Ole Miss, where if you win 9 games a year, you're going to have a job for the rest of your life. They're going to pay you well. You're in the SEC West. We know what it is. To go to the pressure cooker, which is Auburn, which is, if you don't beat Bama in 3 years, you're probably gone. Yeah. And my question for Kiffin is, he's never been able to win the big game anywhere he's been, whether it's USC, whether it's Ole Miss, whether it's FAU, it doesn't matter. He's never been able to win the game. And one of the reasons we fired Gus is because he was never able to win the big game when it really mattered. He would upset Bama or Georgia every once in a while, but outside of that 2013 year when he made the run to the national championship, he was never able to win the game. Are Auburn fans going to be okay with Lane Kiffin going 9-3 and potentially not beating Bama very often, struggling with Georgia? And we saw what happened to Lane Kiffin teams when they lost to LSU a few weeks ago. They went in there, top 10 team in the country, had the world in their hands. If they went out there in the SEC championship, they just absolutely laid an egg against the LSU team that we'll see how good they are, but Tennessee blew the doors off of them 7 days earlier at home in Death Valley. So that's my concern with Lane. He's also going to come with a price tag. I think Justin Hokanson reported today it's going to be probably minimum $9 million a year for him. Just mentioned, we're paying like $60 million in buyouts right now. I know price isn't going to be an issue. I'm sure there's some booster that will fork out the money, but is Lane Kiffin, just take it in a vacuum, is Lane Kiffin worth $9-10 million a year as a head coach? I think there's a good debate that he's not. So that's my concern with him. Hugh Freeze, I know, is another name that's been thrown around, but with all the turmoil, with the pressure cooker that is Auburn, it's a lot easier to keep clean when you're at Liberty. And the pressure's not, the pressure's not
for
really
several
on
reasons.
You.
Yeah,
exactly. And, he just got an extension, but like Hokanson and them said last night that Auburn's not concerned. They're going to if they throw a bag at him, Hugh Freeze has interest, and Hugh Freeze will probably take that job. But man, is Auburn right now in a position where you want the NCAA to go through every single thing with the fine comb? And let's broaden it out. You're going to tell me Hugh Freeze and Bruce Pearl are going to be the faces of the Auburn athletic program with the history that, and I love Bruce, and I think he's probably one of the best basketball coaches in the country. And he's done amazing things at Auburn, but the microscope that Auburn needs to be ready to be under if you hire Hugh Freeze as the head coach is going to be, I don't know if that's something we're ready for, to be honest with you, Bryce. And maybe he has changed, and I think he's paid for his transgressions that happened at Ole Miss, and everyone deserves a second chance. But there's no room for a second mistake, because the first time he takes a step in the wrong direction, the NCAA is going to be all over him. There's no getting away with anything. And then, we'll see what he does there. And then, of course, the dark horse, the X factor that everyone keeps bringing up is Deion Sanders. And Justin Hokanson said last night he's probably going to get an interview. Apparently, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that are pushing for him to get an interview at least and be taken seriously. Bo Jackson mentioned him in an interview last week. We've just repeatedly heard his name. Prom said he has to take the interview if it's available. But the obvious drawbacks are, Bryce, we've both been around here, are the big boosters behind the scenes who gave Cohen all the hell in the world for this hire. Are they really going to be okay with Prom coming in here and having full control of the program? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I think he should. If you're looking for a recruiter, let Prom come in here, do his thing as a CEO, and hire a great staff around him. We know he can do it. He's done it at Jackson State. But then that question mark comes. I've heard some Auburn fans say, are we really going to hire a head coach from the FCS? I do want to say, There's Jim Tressel also had that same
Yeah.
criticism from Youngstown State to Ohio State and did pretty well. And you know what he did well? Recruit. And what he
Mm.
did well? Hire staff around him. So it's happened before. And then, man, outside of that, you just have a bunch of question marks, in my opinion. Matt Rule, he's got some history at Baylor being successful, coming off a bad NFL stint. We've seen some guys drop back down and be successful. Nick Saban, Pete Carroll did great things at USC and,
Hmm.
got his second chance and ultimately has done well with the Seahawks. I think he'll come in for an interview. I don't know if it gets me super pumped. And then everyone else is just some guys who are a little bit unproven. You hear Kelly at Alabama, never been a head coach. Is he the next Kirby Smart? A lot of people wonder. You hear
Hmm.
Jeff Grimes over at Baylor at the offensive coordinator spot, Auburn guy. For me, if we're going to go to Baylor, I'd rather take a chance on Aranda, bringing him back to the
Yeah.
SEC, putting a lot of money into him, letting him bring a good staff into Auburn because I think his what he could do at Auburn is a lot more extensive than what he can do at Baylor. So if we're going to go to Baylor and get Grimes, I would say go get Aranda if anybody, if you're going to go get anyone from over there. And those are probably the names you're going to hear. And then Bryce, as we all know, there's going to be new names popping up every day, especially with
Oh,
the
yeah.
80 just stepping in this week. I know Justin Hokanson on On3 just released his Hot Board 1.0. I would imagine it's going to look completely different in a week or two once the AD and the search committee and everyone kind of gets rolling in these next coming weeks.
It's going to be crazy. I've already seen some fans say, "Is Mike Leach coming along?" From Mississippi State. And I tweeted and threw it out there. Jamie Chadwell would be a
Yeah.
solid candidate. I just don't think that gets the boosters and fans excited enough. It feels like Auburn's going to go for two things, and I tweeted it out. It's got to be a splash hire because of who you're playing, and then the other two things have to be is they're going to stay east of the Mississippi. I don't see them going outside of the SEC footprint, and you got to have Power 5 experience. I think that Auburn has to do that. Last question for you, Zach, and I think this is a big one. I tweeted out today, kind of what I felt like the top open jobs were, and I had Auburn at the top of the list, above Nebraska, above Wisconsin, above Georgia Tech, Colorado, and Arizona State. And I don't think that's far off. But you tell me why, if you do think that, and why maybe Auburn's the best available job as of today.
I think it would be a tight race. I know this is going to sound crazy that I say it's a tight race. Wisconsin is not a bad job.
No.
Wisconsin has the facilities, the money, and they're in the Big Ten. We just saw the TV deal. The money is not going to be an issue. I think Wisconsin's underrated. The reason I would say Auburn's slightly ahead, I think Wisconsin has their guy in house.
Yeah.
Jim Leonard has been groomed for this moment for
Hmm.
however many years he's been there. I mean, if there's a Wisconsin guy, Jim Leonard should be the picture of that. I mean, he is everything they want. I would be very, very surprised if Wisconsin didn't just hire in house. But when you look at Auburn, it's to recruit. It's where you are in recruiting.
Yeah.
Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia. I mean, Auburn is what 15 minutes from Georgia. You have
Oh, yeah.
just as much connections in Georgia as anywhere else. And then also Auburn's recruited Texas very well too recently. There's a lot of guys from this team and guys who have transferred out of past recruiting
Hmm.
classes that were from Texas that we at least brought in out of high school. The recruiting base is insane. You know what the SEC is in terms of exposure, talent, and everything. It's just for me, the one question for Auburn is what's the biggest drawback to this job is voices outside your inner circle. That has been the drawback for since I can remember. If
Hmm.
if if Auburn has an issue of too many hands in the cookie jar. If you hire someone for a job, get out of the way and let them do their job because of people shifting things around, people giving their opinions where they don't need it. Not everyone is a know-it-all football coach. Like if you hire a football coach, you obviously heard something in the interview that made you feel like they can lead your program. Get out of the way. Auburn's too hands-on, and that's the only drawback. And that's why I think is a little closer to Auburn than most people expect, is because in Wisconsin, they're not going to suffocate you up there, and they're going to let you build your program how you need to. And that's the only drawback for Auburn. But in terms of location, money, conference history, it's a top 15 program in college football history. Auburn has everything you want as a job, and then also for the competitor, which we know all coaches are competitors at heart. What better competition than having to face Alabama and Georgia every single season? And you got to win some big recruiting battles because you're not just competing with them. Florida, LSU, those programs can
Yeah.
recruit with the best of them. A&M has been recruiting with the best of them. And then you got Oklahoma and Texas coming in a few years too, which have done very well in terms of the recruiting trail. So Auburn, number one job available right now. And for right now, I don't see another job that's going to open that's going to be more appealing than Auburn, just in terms of the brand and national recognition. The only drawback, and that you hear that with some of the candidates, is they want full control. That's why they wouldn't be interested in Auburn. And so that's something that Auburn behind the scenes is going to have to really come to terms with, is like, we're not going to get a splash hire if we got all these hands in the cookie jar. And that's my biggest question for Auburn.
And maybe the new AD takes care of that. We'll see. That's the hope for Auburn fans. He's Zach McKinnell, Auburn Live on 3, the Blue Bloods podcast. Zach, we appreciate it as always. It was good to meet you in person the other week.
Sure,
not
man.
The result that the Mercer Bears wanted.
Definitely
not.
not.
The SoCon is shaping up, though, with stuff that is going to be a lot of great stuff over the next 3 weeks. Make sure to check him out at the Blue Bloods podcast. Let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find my podcast, The Blue Bloods, YouTube, our website, thebluebloodspod.com, and all podcast streaming platforms. Also, man, check out Auburn Live on 3. We hit 3,000 subs on our Auburn Live channel last night, man. Weekly call-in show. A lot of one of the best group of guys out there, man. Jeffrey Lee, Keith Niebuhr, Justin Hocus, and Cole Pinkston. The list goes on and on, man. Shout out to all those guys. But you can find me there too, producer behind the scenes there. But man, Bryce, appreciate you having me.
Appreciate it as always, man. Stay tuned to the Crowded Booth as well as we continue to talk about this coaching search that I'm sure will have twists and turns. That's all for today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and check us out on social media. We'll see you next time.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.